Betta Bells asks, is public protesting really worth it?
No.
Probably not, but it can be a giggle as long as there's not too many folk singers.
You should put together all the questions we just say no to and like make that a podcast. It's a nice day out for some people, isn't it? So
I enjoy a good protest.
Yeah.
Do you not think it gives folk a false sense that they've actually achieved something, though?
Yes.
When actually they've not at all.
But nonetheless, it's also it builds a sense of community, and it's good.
I felt that was the thing about like the Trump protest that was very weird. We didn't last long at them, to be fair, but when we were there, it
you
was
went to the pub.
Yeah. Well,
By the time you went to the fucking protest, I'd left to go home and have my tea.
I'll explain why though, because like, see, I remember being at like the Iraq War March, right, and there was a little bit of venom to that. Like we were actually like genuinely pissed off about what was fucking happening. It was a bit rawr, fuck Tony Blair. Whereas the Trump protests were weird because it was good that they happened. But it was a bit like a who's made the funniest sign contest. It was just an odd tone. It was like, here's the rise of fascism, and we're just here for a bit of a day out. And like, I think when I it's almost like if you could flash back to like 1930s Germany, there'd be this kind of gathering in the middle of Berlin, and everyone's just making a wee funny sign about Hitler. And I suppose that's good. It is a really good thing. But it was just interesting to me how the level of pissed offness, like the Iraq War marches, there was a very different feeling when you were there to what was present at the Trump ones.
I think that's because of the nature of Trump. I mean, the Iraq War was... God, where do you even start? I mean, I can remember watching Tony Blair and his minions tell lies about Iraq being in any fucking way a threat to us, and it being so obvious that it was bullshit, and here we were trundling in towards it, and the fucking establishment, the weight of all of that going on, and it felt like the beginning of a dystopian future.
Over at the Hyde Park rally, the rail union boss Bob Crow promised Tony Blair that if there is war, the Prime Minister ain't seen nothing yet.
And if war does break out, we should turn around and say that we're prepared to occupy our industries and not be prepared to allow for a war to take place anywhere throughout the world.
And this was the embankment, tens of thousands forming up on the second of the feeder marches. From the north, the south, the east and the west. From the left, the right, from the radical to the uncommitted, they came.
Birmingham.
London. From Bedford.
Cumbria. London. Slough Newington.
From Banbury.
Wellingborough. Northamptonshire.
From Indonesia.
North Wales. Sheffield.
South London.
Birmingham.
Yeah, I come from Bristol, man.
Many say they've never known an atmosphere quite like it. Could that be in part because so many were moved to protest for the first time?
I think the world's going mad. I just feel it's got to be stopped somewhere. Because after this, it'd be something else. It'd be another war after war. We've got to stop it.
Because I can see it escalating into something far wider that we just won't be able to stop.
The rally at Hyde Park was underway many hours before the feeder marches had even finished starting, so to speak. Tariq Ali's seen a demo or two in his time, but he told me he'd never ever seen anything like this.
Friends, we are here today to show Tony Blair and to tell him openly that if one country needs a regime change at the moment, it's Britain. In times of crisis, it is necessary to bring down a Prime Minister. Bring Blair down!
And so we're at Piccadilly Circus, where the two large marches fuse to become one even bigger one and head to the rally at Hyde Park. Well, we can argue forever about the validity of opinion polls, but what surely matters today is that this proposed war by Britain is historically unpopular. And the mother of all focus groups has descended on London to bring that fact home to Tony Blair today.
They just kept on coming. Noon and the police reckoned 150,000 were here. Mid-afternoon, it was 350,000 and counting. By late afternoon, The organisers certainly had a different view.
And our numbers now, we believe, are getting on towards 2 million people marching for peace in London today on this International Day of demonstration against war.
Whatever the figures, without doubt, one of the largest gatherings, let alone protest rallies, in English history.
We will lose this war. It will be a failure. All it will achieve is to be the best recruiting agent that the terrorists could hope for.
The United States is a monster out of control. Unless we challenge it with absolute determination, American barbarism will destroy the world.
And, of course, no gathering like this would be complete without George.
I have to tell you, I would rather be eating cheese, reading Sartre on the banks of the River Seine than taking popcorn with the born-again, Bible-belting, fundamentalist Republican administration in Crawford, Texas, execution capital of the world.
And since we're discussing religion, from early morning it was clear that Muslim groups would this time be playing a large part in proceedings.
Well, the first message is that this is a great alliance, a great coalition between the Muslims and the non-Muslims who agree on the basic values of humanity, of saving mankind from catastrophe.
Some minor argy-bargy outside the US Embassy in Grosvenor Square, where else? But the leader of the 4,500 police on duty said this affair would be peaceful, and pretty much it was.
It's very easy to just sit at home and do nothing, and I thought, no, I'll you know, do something to show my position, really.
I'm a Quaker, and we have a peace testament, and war not at any price.
We're just trying to show that the popular misconception that Americans are pro-war is false.
As ever, some just had their own agenda, but it was left to the only party political leader on the platform to suggest that Parliament perhaps should have some say if we're going to war.
The House of Commons should be given the right, which so far it has been denied, the right of a vote on whether we believe our forces should be sent into battle in that way.
Tonight, some protesters are mounting a sit-in in Piccadilly, but for most it's a tired and perhaps a long journey home. If you thought the Countryside Alliance March was big, think again. And all this just when we were persuading ourselves perhaps that we're becoming more selfish and bored with politics. Well, politics has rarely seemed so interesting to many, and Tony Blair has never appeared so isolated since he took the office of Prime Minister.
You've got very, very angry, impassioned people that are seriously pissed off at their government. Does that not look more, we should take these people seriously? Whereas if the news coverage of the Trump protests is, oh, look at these funny signs, he's orange, is that not kind of downplaying the threat? So when that goes out on the news, right, are we not kind of getting the impression of, like, again, to use the Hitler comparison, Hitler's a bit daft, isn't he? But it's not actually zoning in on, no, this guy is a serious problem. And I just I lost interest in it quickly because it didn't feel like there was a real... It just felt like a gathering of people having a bit of a laugh. It didn't really feel like a serious, fuck this guy kind of reaction. And I felt that that's what that warranted, which concerns me a little bit. Because that, I think that's advantageous to him.
I would agree with all of that. If you think that satire is going to help, I would refer you to the kind of like 1930s Berlin cabaret scene for the effectiveness of that against the rise of fascism. You know?
It's kind of like George Bush, because like everyone loved making fun of George Bush. The guy was a war criminal though, so although he's actually responsible for thousands of people's deaths.
Well, the problem that you have there is that the Bush presidency was, for the first 6 years of it, essentially much more of a puppet regime where you'd got Dick Cheney really running the show. And Dick Cheney was a very, very dangerous and fucking mental man. There was a strong campaign to impeach him first because, you know, it's the, you don't want to get rid of Bush to make Cheney president kind of thing. Not that anybody fucking organised themselves to do it, but the interesting...
That's kind of the point, though, isn't it? Because the emphasis was not put onto Cheney.
Yeah.
It sort of misses the humour should be targeted at like the actual root of the problem.
We're laughing at the fact that, I mean, we were actually laughing at a disability because George Bush's dad, George Bush Senior, also did the same thing, which is they sort of mix words around in sentences, little malapropisms, and that's actually a sort of form of dyspraxia or dyslexia, and we're kind of essentially, I mean, it was funny, but we were all taking the piss out of something that was in fact a disability. George Bush, I'm going to say something quite controversial here. George Bush wasn't as bad a person as we like to think he was. Dick Cheney was responsible for much of it, and George Bush kind of coasted through a lot. And there was a point at which Dick Cheney had organised something, I can't remember the details of it, but he was essentially about to put American troops on the ground to handle a situation, and that's a big no-no over there, like the no standing armies administering stuff. And there was a huge fallout between George Bush and Dick Cheney, and the last 2 years they were really at odds with each other. Cheney was sidelined, and George Bush, I feel, redeemed himself a little bit in those 2 years.
Well, he got elected on a kind of fairly non-interventionist foreign policy.
Yeah.
And then once 9/11 happened, then the Hawks really took over, and they were in control of it.
Yeah, I mean, I've always had the view with 9/11 that it's not a conspiracy or anything like that. I think what simply happened was that America got caught massively off guard.
Yeah.
And politically, it made more sense to go on the attack than admit how horribly weak their defences actually were at the time. And I think it will not have taken long for him to be talked into war and terror, George. Okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, I think, more or less what happened. I don't think it's nearly as conspiratorial as people think. There is probably the connection between him and his dad in terms of Iraq and him wanting to finish what his daddy started and all that, but I still don't think it's maybe as muhahaha.
I can't believe I've wandered into the George W. Bush apologist revisionist podcast.
Yeah, I'm not saying he's not an
I'm only
arsehole. I'm just
joking.
saying that it's not something that really gets reported on.
He was a very mixed man. I mean, he choked on pretzels, but he's very good at dodging shoes. So, a lot of skills. I suppose I was thinking more seriously. The difference between, as abhorrent as that kind of like administration was, it was the Republican Party, and as far out as there as they were, professional and balanced. Whereas the current one is what it's like this kind of Tea Party, like fucking Pepe the Frog, like.
And that's
hybrid.
Yeah, that's
in
entirely a product of a black man in the White House, isn't it?
Probably,
there are people who didn't know they were racist until they had a black president.
In the same way that those Trump protests, I felt somewhat missed the point that this is the sort of difficulty when we seem to be kind of attacking the symptoms rather than the illness. Is that the sort of the phrase possibly you could put to this? In the same way, if you kind of let's make fun of George W. Bush, even though Dick Cheney sat there in broad daylight as the real issue here.
Yeah.
And it's the same sort of thing with Trump, where like we're kind of getting distracted by the fact that he's this sort of clown, but we're not actually gunning for the serious stuff that he's doing wrong. Is that not the approach we should be having?
I don't know what the alternative is. I mean, protests serve a purpose of being a community event that makes people feel that they're not alone in their fucking despair. Right? From that point of view, I don't think I've got any issue with there being a giggle. And we could have less folk music. Have I mentioned the folk music? But so, I don't have any issue with them. I do take your point that they don't necessarily serve any useful purpose in preventing the thing that you're protesting about, but they do make you feel better about that you're not alone.
Is it more that the kind of, we're saying protest, but the modern thing is just more of a gathering?
Yeah.
I think the word's wrong. I think it's like a kind of gathering of anti-Trumpers.
Whereas a protest is like it could kick off into actual violence, whereas none of these have that potential, really.
Yeah, you never had none of this nonsense with the suffragettes. They were proper protesters.
Yeah.